Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The sun was just cresting the hills east of Laramie when Levi Granger spotted the dust cloud. He reined in his dun gelding, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The road below twisted through a dry gulch, and something about the way the dust moved low and fast set his gut on edge. He nudged the horse forward, rifle unstrapped and resting across his saddle. A sharp scream cut through the air. Levi kicked the gelding into a gallop, heart pounding. As he rounded a bend in the trail, the scene below snapped into view: three men on horseback circling a wagon that had tipped halfway into a ditch. A woman stood beside it, dress torn at the hem, arms raised, a revolver shaking in her hand. One of the men laughed and dismounted, reaching for her. Levi did not think. He raised his rifle and fired. The dismounted bandit dropped instantly. The other two shouted and wheeled their horses toward the hills, bullets flying wild behind them. Levi fired again, winging one in the shoulder. The last man vanished around a ridge, leaving the woman standing frozen, the revolver still pointed at nothing. Levi rode down slow, keeping the rifle up until he was sure the men were gone. Dust settled. The woman lowered the gun, then bent over, gripping her knees. "Madam," Levi called gently. "You hurt?" She looked up. Her face was pale but strong, eyes sharp despite the fear. "No, she swallowed. Just need a minute." Levi dismounted. "Take all the time you need." She straightened, brushing dirt from her skirt with shaking hands, her voice steadied. "Thank you, I thought." "They were going to, you do not need to say it." Levi holstered his rifle. "You are safe now." She nodded, blinking hard. "My name is Olive Orley. I am headed to Fort Bridger. My wagon wheels snapped on the rocks and those men came out of nowhere." "Levi Granger," he said. "I am glad I arrived when I did." She looked at him, then really looked, and something softened in her expression. "So am I." Levi glanced at the wagon. Supplies spilled from the back, and one of the wheels sat at a cracked angle. "You are not getting far with that." "I figured as much." Olive sighed. "I left Cheyenne 3 days ago. My older brother was supposed to meet me at the fort. I guess I was too early, or he is too late," Levi said. "Either way, I will not leave you here alone." "I can pay you," she said quickly. "I mean, not much, but I do not want your money." He met her eyes again. "Just want to make sure you are safe." Something in her posture eased then, like she had been holding her breath for miles. Levi spent the next hour fixing what he could. The axle was cracked, but he managed to brace it well enough to get the wagon out of the ditch. Olive helped without complaint, holding tools, pushing when needed, her face streaked with dust but her eyes unflinching. "You have done this before," he said, nodding toward her hands as she tightened a bolt. "I grew up on a ranch outside Denver. My father taught me to handle things myself." "He taught you well," she smiled, and it was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. By late afternoon, they had the wagon roadworthy barely. Olive's mare had bolted during the attack, so Levi tied her wagon to his gelding and offered her his saddle. "You ride, I will walk." "No," she said, firm, "we share." So they rode together, her in front, him steady behind, one arm loosely around her waist to hold her steady on the trail. The silence between them was not awkward. It was quiet, steady, like the land itself. As the sun lowered, they made camp beside a shallow creek. Levi set up a small fire while Olive unpacked bread and dried apples from the wagon. "I should be scared out of my mind," she said, handing him a tin plate. "But you are not," she shook her head. "Not anymore." He looked across the fire at her hair messy from the wind, jaw bruised from a fall, hands scraped raw, and thought she looked braver than anyone he had met in years. "You are strong," he said. She held his gaze. "So are you." They ate in silence for a while. Then Olive asked quietly, "Why were you out there, passing through?" "I had been working a cattle drive up near Medicine Bow, heard about work near Fort Bridger," she nodded. "Then maybe we were meant to cross paths." Levi looked into the fire. "Maybe." That night, he laid his bedroll a few feet from hers. The stars stretched wide overhead. Coyotes yipped far off. Olive turned on her side, her voice soft in the dark. "Levi." "Yeah, thank you for saving me." He turned his head toward her, catching the faint shape of her face in the moonlight. "You are welcome," she whispered. "I do not think I have ever felt this safe before." Levi's chest ached at that. He closed his eyes, arm folded behind his head, and listened to her breathing grow even. He did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, they set out early. The wagon held together and the trail was quiet. Levi stayed beside her the whole way, eyes scanning the ridges. Olive did not ask about the men who had attacked her, and Levi did not press. But when she reached for his hand to steady herself climbing back into the wagon, he let her hold it a little longer than needed. By midday, the roofs of Fort Bridger came into view on the horizon. Olive exhaled. She looked at Levi. "This is where we part ways, I suppose." He nodded once. "I reckon." But neither of them moved. Then she said quietly, "Do you want to come with me? Just for a while?" Levi looked at her, really looked. He saw the strength beneath her calm, the kindness behind her guarded words, and he knew he was not ready to let her go. "Yeah," he said, "I do." They rode the last mile side by side, closer now. And neither of them looked back. The wind carried the scent of pine and sun-warmed earth as Fort Bridger came steadily into focus. The fort's wooden palisade was lined with wagon tracks and mule droppings, the air buzzing with activity, soldiers unloading supply crates, wives drawing water from the well, a wiry blacksmith hammering at a horseshoe. Levi guided the wagon past the main gate while Olive sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes tracking every movement like she was memorizing the place before stepping into it. They stopped near the livery stable, where a soldier in a sweat-darkened uniform waved them in. Levi helped Olive down, and she adjusted the sleeve of her blouse where it had torn at the seam. Her chin lifted just slightly as she looked around, not proud, not fearful, just steady. "Your brother might be quartered near the telegraph shack," Levi said. "Officers tend to stay near the center yard." "He's not an officer," she replied. "He's a supply clerk. If he's here, he'll be working behind a desk somewhere." She turned toward the wagon, her expression unreadable. "But I'll find him." Levi didn't speak. He waited while she leaned into the back of the wagon, pulled out a canvas satchel, and slung it over one shoulder. She paused, fingers resting on the edge of the wood. "I half expected you to ride off the moment we crossed the gate," she said without looking at him. "I thought I might," Levi answered, "but here I am." She faced him then. "Why?" "Because I didn't feel finished." Olive blinked once, then nodded. "Stay, just for today." "I could use help finding the office." They walked together through the main yard, passing soldiers cleaning rifles and a group of children playing with a stick and hoop. A woman with a baby on her hip gave them a polite nod. Olive kept her shoulders straight, but Levi noticed how her fingers curled tightly around her satchel strap. Inside the supply building, the air was thick with paper dust and ink. A clerk behind the desk, a balding man with ink-stained fingers, glanced up from a ledger. "We're not taking orders till next week," he said. "I'm looking for Thomas Orley," Olive said. "He's my brother." The man squinted. "Tom left with the wagon train to Evanston 3 days ago, took a convoy of dried goods." She didn't respond right away. Her mouth pressed into a line, but she didn't flinch. "Did he leave a note?" she asked. "Just said he'd be back in a week," the man replied. "Didn't mention expecting anyone." Levi shifted his weight. Olive stood very still, then gave a single nod. "Thank you." They stepped back into the midday light. Levi waited until they were halfway across the yard before speaking. "You want to stay here till he returns?" She looked toward the edge of the yard where the hills rolled out like a green sea. "No, I don't." Levi studied her profile. "Where to then?" "There's a woman I knew in Bear River. She runs a boarding house. I can stay there a spell until I decide. I'll take you." "You don't have to. I want to." They left the fort by late afternoon, the wagon creaking along a narrow trail headed southwest. The sun hung low behind them, casting long shadows of the sagebrush across the dusty road. Neither of them spoke for a while. Olive broke the silence. "You ever lose someone?" "Yes." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. She only nodded, the silence between them shifting again, shaped now by something understood without words. Ahead, a pronghorn darted across the trail, its hooves kicking up a scatter of stones. Olive's eyes followed it, then rested on the hills beyond. "I thought I'd feel different once I found him," she said. "Lighter, maybe, but all I feel is stillness, like everything in me just went quiet." Levi kept his eyes forward. "Maybe that's the beginning of something." She looked sideways at him. "And what would you know about beginnings?" "I've had to start over twice. Once when my brother died, once when I left Texas." "Why'd you leave?" because staying meant living in someone else's anger. I figured if I kept going west, it couldn't catch me. And did it? No, he said. But it followed a while. A smile passed over her mouth, faint but present. You have a way of making things sound simple. Nothing I've ever done was simple, but talking to you makes it feel that way. She shifted closer on the wagon seat, not much, just enough that their sleeves brushed. They reached Bear River after sundown. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, painted in fading yellow with lace curtains in the windows. Warm lamplight spilled through the front room. Olive climbed down first, and Levi handed her the satchel. She stood at the bottom of the steps, her hand on the railing. I don't have much left, not in the way of plans. You don't need plans yet, Levi said. Just peace. You offering some? He nodded once. If you'll have it. She stepped forward and laid her hand on his chest, just over the buttons of his shirt. Her fingers were warm, steady. I'm not good at easy, she murmured. I'm not offering easy, he said. Just honest. She leaned up and pressed her lips to his soft, certain, unrushed. The kiss tasted of dust and hope and something new beginning. When she pulled back, her voice was low. Stay. He touched her cheek with the back of his hand. I was already going to. The boarding house room was small but clean, with a braided rug that muted their steps and a narrow window overlooking the quiet street. The scent of dried lavender clung to the linens. Olive set her satchel down by the washstand and turned toward Levi, her face unreadable in the lamplight. I haven't seen this town in nearly 4 years, she said, unpinning her hair with slow fingers. Didn't expect it to feel so much like. Nothing. Levi leaned against the doorframe, arms folded across his chest. You left something behind here, she nodded once, her brow creasing. A man I almost married. He ran a freight line out of Fort Hall. He promised more than he could give. What made you walk away? I didn't like the way he watched the horizon more than he watched me. Levi's jaw shifted slightly. You want to see him again? No, she said, clear and even. I came back for myself, not him. He stepped inside the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The air shifted between them. Olive sat on the edge of the bed and worked at the laces of her boots, her sleeves rolled to the elbows now, revealing the faint dust lines on her forearms. She glanced up at him, something tired in her posture but not defeated. I don't know what you're expecting, she said, but I don't come with ribbons or promises. I'm not asking for either. She held his gaze. Then what are you asking for? He crossed the room and sat beside her, not touching. A place to land, maybe, someone who doesn't flinch at quiet. A long breath moved through her chest. You always speak like you've already weighed every word. I've had enough years to learn what not to say. She turned her head. And what haven't you said? He met her eyes. That I didn't ride with you just to see you safe. I rode with you because I felt steadier near you than I've felt in a long while. Olive's throat moved as she swallowed. She looked down at her hands, then back up, her voice low. I don't need rescuing anymore. I know, he said. That's not why I'm here. Something settled in her shoulders then, like a weight shifting into place rather than falling off. She reached for the lamp and turned the wick low. The room dimmed to amber. They lay side by side that night, not touching at first, the hush between them undisturbed. Then her fingers found his against the blanket, and he turned his hand over, palm up. She laced her fingers with his, and neither of them said a word. By morning, the wind had picked up from the west. Olive stood at the window while Levi packed his things into the saddlebag. She watched the clouds roll low and fast, skirts brushing her ankles. Ruth Atlee still runs the schoolhouse, she said. She offered me a place if I wanted it, teaching letters to the little ones. You going to take it? I think so. He buckled the flap of his bag and looked over. You'll be good at it. She gave a half smile, something more thoughtful than pleased. What about you? You still chasing cattle work? I could be, he said, but I don't have to be. She turned fully toward him. Then what would you do? He lifted his hat from the chair and turned it once in his hands. Build fences, mend roofs, haul freight if someone needs it, long as the days are honest. And if I asked you to stay, I'd stay. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for the edges of something fragile. Then she stepped to him and placed her hand over his heart. Then I'm asking. He kissed her then, not hurried, not filled with heat, just quiet and sure. Later that day, Levi traded the gelding for a small bay mare better suited to town work and left the saddle stored in the boarding house shed. Olive unpacked her satchel and hung a single calico dress in the narrow wardrobe. They walked together to the schoolhouse that evening, her hand tucked around his arm, their shadows long behind them. And when a neighbor called out a greeting, Olive answered with a voice clear as a bell. "This is Levi Granger. He's with me," and he was. The first frost came early that year. Leaves thinned to their skeletons along Bear River's cottonwoods, and the morning air carried a bite that clung to skin through wool. Levi rose before sunup most days, hands raw from chopping kindling behind the boarding house, his breath hanging thick as smoke in the dim light. He hadn't said it aloud, but he was staying. Not for a season, not until trail work called him off again, but for good. Olive moved through the days with quiet resolve. She took on the schoolhouse role without ceremony, walking each morning with a satchel of slates and readers, her skirts brushing the dew from the grass. She didn't ask Levi to escort her. Still, he waited each day until she reached the steps before turning away. One morning, as he repaired the fence behind the livery, a man approached older, with a crooked gait and a stitched-up cheek that pulled his eye downward. He leaned on a cane carved from juniper. "You're Granger?" he asked, not unkindly. Levi stood, brushing splinters from his palms. I'm Nathan Cobb, Ruth Atlee's cousin." Levi waited. "She mentioned you're handy. There's a line cabin up near Chalk Ridge needs a new roof before snow sets in. I can pay in feed and coin." Levi nodded. "I'll ride out tomorrow." Cobb gave a grunt that passed for approval and started off without another word. That evening, Olive returned from the schoolhouse with a tear in her shawl and a scrap of paper in her hand. She laid both on the table in their room and sat without removing her gloves. "You ever meet a child who looks at you like they see through every wall you've built?" Levi looked up from the fire he was feeding. "Once. My brother's boy back in Texas. He was born quiet and mean-eyed, like he knew what waited for us." She passed him the paper. A child's drawing a crooked house with smoke spilling from a lopsided chimney, and beside it, two stick figures with holding hands drawn with care. He watched me all morning, didn't say a word, then handed me this and sat back down like nothing happened. Levi studied the drawing. "Looks like he thinks you belong somewhere." Olive ran a hand over her face. "I don't know if I'm ready for the weight of being needed." "You already carry it," Levi said. "You just don't name it." She rose and crossed the room to where he knelt by the hearth. Her fingers grazed the edge of his jaw, not soft, not hesitant, just present. "I've never had someone stay," she said. "Not because they had to or because they wanted something, just stay." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and pulled her close, his hand resting at the base of her spine. She didn't move away. "I rode with you because I saw a woman who didn't yield when the world tried to break her," he said. "I stayed because I want to see what you build when it can't reach you anymore." She pressed her forehead to his chest. "I don't know how to build anything that lasts." Then we learned together. They stood like that until the fire crackled low and the room dimmed to amber. The next morning, Levi rode out toward Chalk Ridge with a bedroll, a roofing hammer, and a tin of beans Olive had packed without comment. The trail climbed slow and steady, winding through yellow grass and wind-bent pine. The cabin, perched above a dry creek, leaned like it had been holding its breath for years. He worked until his arms trembled, then built a fire and slept on the floorboards beneath a patch of stars. He thought of her often, how she looked when she read the child's drawing, how her hand had rested against his chest, like it had always belonged there. By the time he returned to town 3 days later, the sky had turned steel gray and the air smelled of snow. He found her kneeling beside the schoolhouse stove, coaxing heat from kindling with a bellows. Her hair was tied back with a strip of green calico he hadn't seen before. "You're back," she said, rising. "I am. You hungry?" "Starving." She led him back to their room, where a pot of stew simmered low and the window fogged with warmth. As she ladled food into bowls, Levi reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small bundle wrapped in flannel. She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a carved wooden figure, a mare and foal, rough-hewn but careful. Olive reached out and turned it over in her hand. "You made this," he nodded. She looked at him, her voice quiet. Why? I wanted you to have something real. Something that doesn't walk away. She set the figures on the table and stepped into him, her arms winding around his waist. Her voice was thick with something unspoken. Then I should give you something real, too. He kissed her, slow and certain. And when they lay beside each other that night, the silence between them wasn't heavy or fragile. It simply was. And it held. The snow came in the night without warning, fine and dry, coating rooftops and fence rails in a pale hush. Levi woke before the bell tower struck 6, Olive still curled beneath the quilt, her hand resting just above his ribs, fingers slightly curled. He lay still, listening to the quiet weight of winter settling over Bear River. She stirred when he rose and crossed the room to light the stove. "You'll freeze your feet," she mumbled into the pillow. "I've worked colder," he said, feeding wood into the stove's belly, "but I won't turn down coffee." She sat up, wrapping the shawl around her shoulders as steam began to rise from the kettle. "You planning to go out in that? There's a delivery of coal at the church that needs hauling, and Ruth's roof has a leak near her chimney." He pulled on his boots. "I'll be back before the schoolhouse bell rings." She nodded, still blinking the sleep from her eyes. "Leave your gloves by the stove when you come back. I can mend the split seam." He paused. "You've got a way of making things last, Olive." She didn't answer, only gave a soft huff and reached for the coffee pot. Outside, the town moved slower beneath the snow. Children trudged in pairs, bundled in mismatched wool, and the blacksmith's fire gave off a sharper light in the white morning. Levi worked through the tasks methodically, returning with coal dust on his hands and the scent of cedar smoke in his coat. When he stepped inside, Olive was seated at the table, sewing needle glinting in the lamplight, a copy of McGuffey's Fourth Reader open before her. "Letters came," she said, nodding to the envelope at his place. "From Thomas." Levi peeled the seal open slowly. The letter was brief, written in a steady hand. Thomas apologized for missing her arrival, explained the delays at Evanston, and mentioned plans to return come spring. "He wants me to visit once the road's clear," she said, not looking up from her stitching. "Says there's room at the clerk's lodging. What do you think?" She tied off the thread and set the glove down. "I think I don't need to go unless I want to." He folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "And do you want to?" She pushed her chair back. "I used to think I was waiting for my brother to give me a place to belong. But the truth is, I was just waiting to stop feeling like a ghost." Levi crossed to her. And now, her eyes met his, steady and warm. "Now I know I'm here." That evening, they walked to the church social, Olive's gloved hand tucked into the crook of his arm. The chapel had been cleared of pews, with lanterns strung from the rafters and a fiddler tuning his strings near the stove. Couples swayed to slow songs, boots scuffing across the pine floor. Ruth waved them in, pressing warm cider into their hands before bustling off to scold a boy for climbing the hymn bench. Levi stood beside Olive as the music started, uncertain. "I've never danced proper," he admitted. "Neither have I," she said, "but I've watched enough to fake it." He offered his hand. "Then let's fake it together." They stepped into the rhythm, clumsy at first, her skirt brushing his boots with each turn, but then something loosened between them and the movement found its pace. Olive laughed, low and surprised, and Levi grinned despite himself. "You're not half bad," she said when the song ended. "You keep leading," he muttered, brushing her hair back from her cheek. She leaned in close, her words for him alone. "Then follow me home." Later that night, with the fire burned low and snow tapping soft against the windows, Olive stood at Levi's side, hair down, her hand resting against his chest. "You ever think about staying?" she asked. "I already did," he said. "I mean more than winter." He took her hand and laid it flat over his heart. "I mean to see every spring with you." She didn't cry, didn't smile wide. She only stepped close and kissed him full, her hands threading into his shirt, and he kissed her back with the quiet certainty of a man who had wandered long enough to know when he'd found home. They didn't speak again that night, not with words. But everything between them was spoken in the way they moved together, slow, sure, unhurried, as though they had all the time in the world. Because now they did. The snow stayed for weeks, but the cold never touched the small home they built inside that room. They added another quilt to the bed. Olive hung a pressed fern above the door. Levi carved a shelf for her readers and a stool for her to rest on after school. In March, when the snow began to retreat in patches and the river ran louder, Olive stood outside the schoolhouse as Ruth approached, out of breath. "That boy," Ruth said, pointing back toward the church steps. "He said you're the one who taught him to read his father's name." Olive looked over to where the child stood, hands in his coat pockets, watching. She nodded once, then turned toward the fence where Levi leaned, arms folded, watching her with that same quiet gaze he always had. She walked to him, took his hand in hers, and said, "Come see what we've planted." And they did. Years passed and they stayed. Olive taught each child who passed through the clapboard schoolhouse, and Levi built barns and broke trail until folks started calling him the man who could fix anything. They married in the spring beneath the cottonwood near the river, with Ruth officiating and half the town scattering seed and bread for birds. There was no fuss, just vows spoken plain and true, and the way Olive looked at Levi like he was the first thing that ever made sense. They never left Bear River. They didn't need to. Their days were not always easy, but they were honest, marked by the scrape of tools, the laughter of children, and the quiet strength of two people who had learned each other not in haste, but in the steady rhythm of real life. And every night, when the lamps were turned low and the stove burned soft, Levi still reached for Olive's hand beneath the quilt, and she always reached back.